So in terms of Ancestry.com, it's the clear leader in the genealogy space in 2024. This is both from a tree maker perspective and also from a DNA database perspective. You can see Ancestry right now is offering a 14-day free trial for anybody who wants to get started. There's actually 27 plus billion historical records now in Ancestry. And I think Dad has added about a quarter of those. So, and a huge DNA database with over 16 million samples, which is pretty astounding. And then, of course, as Dad mentioned, the hints to people in historical records. Of course, as you found out from Dad's experience, don't always listen to the hints and think that they're gospel, but they're definitely useful in giving you clues. Right. So any thoughts about Ancestry? Is there really anybody in the same category as Ancestry, or is this really the database people should be logging into and signing up for?
Well, I can say one thing about Ancestry. If you're looking to doing Ancestry DNA, it does go on sale before Mother's Day and Father's Day and Christmas. So Amazon also does a sale, and don't be worried about buying it through Amazon versus the actual company, because it's the same product. And when it comes to doing your DNA and the other options that are out there, your DNA never changes. And so when you look at your results on like the 3 sites that Bill has done, your matches are always going to be your matches, because your DNA is always your DNA. It's when it comes to the ethnicity percentages that you're going to see variations, because your DNA sample is going into different databases. So much like I talked about the database to run our reports that has all of your tree information, these databases that contain our DNA are all different. So some may have more Northern European, some may have more Southern European, some may have more of the Russian side of Europe. It all depends on all of the tests that are in that database.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really fascinating. I've done almost all, I think, of the DNA companies, and my percentages are all across the board. But what's fascinating is that my matches don't change, but my ethnicity changes a little bit. And Ancestry every once in a while will update your ethnicity percentages, and the other companies do as well, because their databases are evolving and becoming more accurate and more specific. Because in some cases, it can drill your DNA matches down to a specific village in Europe. So that's where the concentration of your DNA comes from.
A couple things I'd call out on this page. Despite the vast number of records available, navigating the platform is remarkably straightforward. And Dad, you mentioned that how easy it was for you to pick up this site almost within a day or two. You were off and running.
Yeah,
So
I found
simple.
it. Yeah, I actually, even being a complete unschooled amateur, I did look at several different sites to figure out which one I wanted to start the tree on. And the one that looked the right for me was Ancestry. But there, as Sally knows, there are quite a number of different companies that have trees that you can use to start your family tree. In other words, the system is there. It just, I like the way Ancestry was set up. That's
right.
all.
Right.
And it's nice to be able to pick one for your comfort level. You know, what is comfortable to use for you. It isn't required to use any of them.
No, that's right. Yep. Also mentioned here, you can find ancestors using the search tool by just searching their names, their birth dates, or their places. And I assume, Dad, you've done that many, many times, just looking for different names.
I've had people contact me too.
Right. As the database gets bigger and bigger on a daily basis, I assume it just becomes more and more useful. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I've had people contact me through Ancestry, through 23andMe as well. Those are the two I did the, I think Sally called it autosomal DNA, and then I did through something called family tree DNA, I think it is,
Yes.
the Y chromosome, which
Mhm.
was extremely helpful because it allowed us to break through a brick wall that my father and grandfather were unable to get through.
Actually, can we quickly talk about that, Sally, the difference between the
Absolutely.
Y DNA
Sure.
test versus any other ones?
Yes. So your autosomal DNA, which covers both your maternal side and your paternal side, is your standard test that you're going to get with Ancestry and 23andMe. FTDNA also does an autosomal DNA test as well. What FTDNA does that the others don't do is the Y DNA or an mtDNA. So the Y DNA is for you gentlemen because the Y DNA is what is passed down from your father. So your Y DNA results are going to take Bill Pope, what's going to start with Tom Pope, then will match with Bill Pope, which will match with your father, and so on. So when you
Okay.
look, if you had a fan tree and half of it was your mom's side and half was your dad's side, your Pope line would be the straight line up. So it would take your popes as far back as possible. And it's going to be only Pope. And if anybody's name pops in there that's not Pope, that's when they've had a non-paternal event, including a Pope, a male Pope. So that is your Y DNA. Now, mtDNA is what women can do, and that test is going to do the exact same thing, but take my mother and then my maternal grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother, and do the exact same thing that the Y test has done, but for my mother's side. So
Interesting.
that will take me back directly on the maternal side, like yours has done on your paternal side. And
Very
why-
cool.
You know, people like doing those because of the specificity that those provide. But in general, when you want to look at your ancestry, if you want to look at the ethnicity, if you want to find cousins, people that you feel like you're missing in your family, the autosomal DNA is what we use as our standard because it covers all of your DNA matches.
Very interesting. Thank you for explaining that. Hey, Dad, have you taken both types of DNA tests, including the Y?
I took three, two autosomal
Mm-hmm.
and one Y.
Okay.
And the Y was the one that allowed us to figure out which, thanks to David Pope, whom you're going to meet soon. David runs this Pope DNA group, and I'm sure there are lots of others like it for other families. And he was able to determine which of the two principal groups of popes in Virginia we came from. And my father and grandfather were never able to figure that out. They knew it was one of the two, but thanks to DNA, we were able to, the Y DNA, we were able to figure out which of the two pope groups we came from.
So essentially, the brick wall came down with the Y DNA test.
Yes.
Essentially. That's fascinating. So one other thing I wanted to mention before we leave this slide, Dad, can you quickly talk about this new system you've put in to basically enumerate the generations so you don't get confused in your ancestry tree?
Well, this is something I dreamed up, and I have no idea whether anyone else would be interested or whether it's professional or unprofessional. But I saw so many people who would have an ancestor many generations out, and they would have next to it, it would say 12GG or 12GGF, 12GGM, 12th great-great-grandmother, 12th great-great-grandfather. I just found that confusing. And so I started numbering the generations from me out, with me as one, and my father is 2, and my grandfather is 3. And it's made a huge difference for me. But that's just something I dreamed up, and I don't know whether anyone else would.
So then when you're looking at an ancestor that has a 40 next to their name, you know they're 40th generation, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha. And for you, it's just helped you not be confused when you're doing the research.
Less confused.
Right.
Help
Got
me
it.
be slightly less confused.
I think it's a good system because every time I've looked at your tree, it just makes sense to me. So it's a good system.
And that's the beautiful thing about it is you can personalize your tree so you understand what those names mean. And when you use that numbering system, you know what generation you're speaking of, because sometimes those surnames and given names match. So you know which generation you're looking at.
Yes.
Right. So Sally, let's talk about this great template you gave us, the family group record,
Yes.
and how you use this when you're getting started.
This is one of the tools that I would want my clients to start out with and prepare and give me everything that they know. So, and if you're going to do your genealogy on your own, this is also a good way to start, because what this form does is it gives the husband and the wife, which would be equivalent to mother and father, all the pertinent information about each of them, including their parents, as well as at the bottom half, the children's names. Now, depending on how far back we're going, most families had more than 5 kids. So you'd want a couple copies of this to capture all 10 or 11, 12 kids that some poor woman had. But this encapsulates the generation. So it gives the husband, the wife, their other spouses, their parents, and all of their children and their children's spouses as well. So this is a nice snapshot of that whole generation. And so this could be used as a to-do list, because whatever field is blank is where you need to look for another record, or that person is say child number 3 is the one that you want to investigate. So you would do another family group sheet, move child number 3 up to the husband or the wife, enter the information for them, and list their children. So it can be easily grown as your tree with the detail. Then if we go to the next slide, is the very abbreviated direct ancestral chart. So Bill and I were joking, we were calling this the NBA bracket. So essentially you're the winner on the bracket, and you win because you had all of your ancestors that existed, and without them, you wouldn't exist. So you get to win on the bracket. This is going to give your name to the far left, then your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents. And in actuality, each one of these people could have their own family group sheet, because you'll see how that detail on the family group sheet is compacted down to the ancestral line here. And it's just, if you don't want to invest in an online program, or you don't feel comfortable using Ancestry or Family Tree Maker or any of the other companies out there, you can certainly start off with the paper forms and organize the documents that you have, organize them with these tools that are easily accessible, and start your family tree from there.
And you could just number it, right? Chart number 1, chart number 2, and just keep going out as many generations as you can. Yeah, that's good. So Dad, imagine the tree that you and Sally have built on the Popes. How many of these sheets you would have?
A lot. A library full.
What generation are you back to now, Dad? Do you
know? Around 60.
60? Okay. What is that, around 1033 or something?
Yeah, around 1,900. But you notice in those stories that I write to you all, I always say, if I have made the correct connections correctly. And I always caveat it in those stories that I send you, because especially when you get back that far, even if you've done pretty well halfway through, when you get back that far, there's a lot of mythology and speculation, it's still fun to read about them, but
So your percentage
it's-
of accuracy goes down over time,
yeah,
essentially.
sure. And
And you're doing-
I always caveat those stories.
What kind of records would they have from 900 or 1,000? I mean, were there records that you could rely on?
Well, when you think about the chart that you showed that for Louis III,
Hmm.
ancestry was a big thing back then. And even if you think about the fun little movie, A Knight's Tale, when the knight had to prove his lineage so he could participate in the jousting event, that was a big deal. So you had to carry around a copy of your family tree for you to be eligible to compete in the joust.
Wow.
So
That's
that was
amazing.
something that was legitimately started way back when. We're
You
just
just gave us
following.
the fact of the night. You needed your family tree to be able to participate. Interesting.
Yeah, it's I was saying to Sally, it's sort of the middle generations that you have to really be careful about, because most people can go several generations just from their own knowledge or the family Bible or whatever. And then if you get out and you hit onto an internationally known, a historical personage who is well documented, then the documentation tends to be pretty solid all the way back out. Like, for example, the Viking who came down and basically took over Western France, Rollo, and took over Western France and created what's now called Normandy. They were the Normans, they were Northmen. And he's a long way back in the 900s, but it's well documented because he was such a famous figure. It's sort of in the middle when you go from what you know through several generations, and then you hit a historically solid person.
Hmm.
Then I think you're in pretty good shape from there out. It's making sure that from the point that you know, close to you, 4 or 5 generations out to generation 10. And that's where I've made my mistakes, is in those generations where we didn't have family records, and trying to rely on these different sites. And then I would get to somebody who was historically well known, and then you can go confidently from there. But it's the connection in between. That's why I've been so grateful to Sally for trying to help me confirm what I call those middle generations.
Right.
Sadly,
Yeah,
we've
because
got
if you
pockets.
if you go Y instead of X, then you're going to just go in a completely wrong direction. Then you're going to connect
And
all the dots.
I've done it several times and
Yeah.
had to go back and take a lot of people out of the tree. And it's
Mhm.
painful.
We've got pockets of time where records are scarce. And so depending on who your family was, we've got some solid records. But when it comes to your average blacksmith, there may not be any records. So it all comes to
Right.
an end on some lines. And when you say you're back to the 1100s, that's not all of your lines. Those are a few of the lucky lines that go back.
Oh,
So-
yes, absolutely. Not on all, no, not on all the lines. Some of them just stop.
Right. And that's okay.
And
That's
when
something that
when do the hints usually stop on Ancestry? Because I know, Dad, you said at some point you get back far enough and there's just no hints anymore, right?
I don't know, maybe 20 generations out or something. I'm not sure. Sally might know.
I think it's when Ancestry has something in their database that they feel is a substantive enough record to confirm that person. And so they probably aren't going to include the encyclopedias and the history books that sometimes we can use to get back to that medieval period a lot in their database. They're going to focus on the database of the
Mhm.
records that they can find for 17, 18, 1900s.
Right. Well, just think, if all of you guys who are listening want to do Dad's experience and get back to the 60th generation, in the 900s. You just need to spend 20 hours a day for 5 years and you're good. Right, Dad?
Easy.
Need the luck.
Yeah, and you do need luck too. You
Let's
need
talk about,
somebody like Sally.
that's right, you do. Let's talk about family search collections, how great a resource this is, free resource. You're talking about the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah, run by the Mormon Church, with 2 million microfiche and microfilms included. You've got 4,500 family history centers worldwide that feed into this process. You got their great family search website that you can go to anytime, with a big database, historical records, digitized family history books, resources, and everything else. And you have this thing called the Family History Research Wiki that contains research guidance articles. So can you guys talk a little bit about how important this is in the overall chain of doing the research?
Sure. The wiki is so very handy because when you're looking at some of the areas that you've never even considered knowing about, when you find that you've got your ancestors, say maybe in a county in Kentucky or Tennessee that you've never even driven through, you can pull up Family Search and it's going to give you the options for additional records that you can find in that area. So don't feel like when you're looking for your ancestors that you're always going to know the area that they've lived in, because once you'll get lucky and successful, you're going to learn all kinds of new places in the country that are going to have all these different records. And it's sometimes overwhelming even conceiving of how you can access them. And this Family Search really does help you know how to access them.
You know, and it was amazing to sit with you, Dad. You were showing me one of the ancestors you were researching, and you were toggling back and forth in between Family Search and Ancestry.com and other sites that you were looking at. And it was just really interesting to watch you kind of go back and forth to use all these different sites to check each other and make sure that the person you were looking at is really what you thought they were.
And, and sometimes all the sites will have the same, maybe census documents, but one site will have a clearer copy of the census document because they may have scanned it a little bit differently, or they actually have a different copy, physical copy that was scanned originally of the census, because there were more than one copy of each census form made. So when you think about the people that were doing the census takers going from house to house on horseback, when they would write everybody's names and their age and what they did for a profession, they'd go back to their cabin, and then by candlelight, they would have to make a copy of that page and submit multiple copies of the same form. So sometimes you'll see where they're possibly a line off, or their ages drop a line. That's because they were copying. And some are just a little bit more legible than others.
Makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts, Dad, on the Family Search and how much you use it?
Well, I want Sally's more guidance on this, but what I've been doing is sort of using that as a tiebreaker, because they have so many millions of records. So if I see somebody, and in two sites that's George Smith, and in two other sites it's Fred Smith, and the Family Search, the Latter-day Saints have George Smith, and I tend to lean toward that. What do you say, Sally?
I would have to analyze the records a little bit more clearly to see why one has George and one doesn't, and see if they're both children of the same father or if they're brothers. It's an interesting quandary that we run into when the indexing is done a little bit differently sometimes. And if you look at the original document versus what the indexer has believed that they have read, sometimes that indexing is a human error. So I know on Ancestry, if you find that somebody has index the census form a little bit incorrectly, and you know that person's name, you can suggest an edit in Ancestry.
Mhm.
And so that clears up any misunderstanding.
And sometimes they'll use the first name, sometimes they use the middle name, especially in the South. You know,
And
a lot of
initials,
Southern families will use the middle name for boys especially.
right?
So you gotta look out.
Very prevalent in our family.
There's no doubt.
Exactly that.
Yep. So talking about indexing ancestral information, it's another thing that is really a big part of the industry is transcribing parish records and city vital records and other reports, putting everything into kind of a digital database format for searching. And I know this is a big thing that means a lot to the genealogical community. And we talked earlier in the program about the 72-year limit for releasing of personal information from the U.S. Census.
Mhm.
And that Sally was mentioning that now we're waiting for the 1960 census to come out, which I guess would be, what, in about 5 years, Sally?
No, it'll be in 10. It'll
Oh, 10
be,
years. 10 years.
yeah,
Okay.
it'll be 2034.
hmm But do you see a lot of efforts to more and more all around the country? They're trying to do more and more of this indexing
Oh,
online.
absolutely.
Yeah.
When you look, if you belong to a lot of the genealogy societies, and whether they be county, state, or national, there's always an opportunity for volunteer indexing. And it's really a critical and important effort to get these documents indexed, whether it be groups that would specifically pertain, records that specifically pertain to, say, the Civil War, or different county records. We need to get as many of those records out of the old courthouses as possible and preserve them, get them scanned, get them indexed. And I know that even the family Bibles, there's some groups that go around the country, and sometimes they're family Bibles sitting in antique malls, and somebody will, spend $10 and donate the Bible so it can be scanned and indexed, so it can be preserved and hopefully found by someone looking for that family later on.
That is super cool. I noticed also here, Family Search has now gotten to 1 billion searchable records by 2012. So I assume 12 years later now, they must be at 2 billion records or something.
We can only
Um,
hope.
And then I also noticed, and we mentioned this yesterday when we talked to Ellie about the whole AI technology and how that's going to impact ancestry in general. But what are your thoughts about AI and what that could bring for us?
I think we can use AI in a positive light when it comes to the scanning and the transcription of records. I'm seeing it in some of the newspaper sites and in Family Search, and it's not perfect, but when we consider how new AI is when it comes to looking at these archival documents, that AI is only going to get better and better. But again, it's still going to take that human eye to confirm that what was scanned and what was transcribed is accurate. And so I don't think the AI version is going to be strong enough to stand on its own. I think it's going to be a suggestion or a hint to look at the original document.
And you mentioned the AI technology still struggling with things like script and old language and old words.
Yes.
But it'll get better. So I have to think by 2030 or something. I just can't imagine what that technology will be like and how much easier it'll make the genealogist's life when they're searching for something, right?
Exactly.
That'll be cool. My son actually loves AI and he works with it and he even builds little AI programs. He's a developer and
Fascinating.
he swears that the amount of progress every single year is really astounding with what AI can
We
do.
live
So
in very interesting times.
for sure. And you said you're a tech geek, so there you go.
Mhm.
So another thing to mention here, family names, nicknames, and given names is a really important thing to understand. What the family name is, what the surname is, what the last name is. Understanding that in some languages, like in this example we have here, Olaf Thorson is Olaf, son of Thor. and just kind of understanding those types of formats that different countries and different societies used. And you see an example here of some of the naming traditions that came from England, Scotland, and Ireland, and understanding how those families would name their child after the paternal grandfather, after the maternal grandfather, etc. And just understanding that those naming patterns were important and that you needed to understand it as you do your research. Any thoughts here?
We always think that we've got it easy when we've got an unusual name. But if we come across an unusual name and we get all excited, but when you look at the naming tradition here, you're going to see that unusual name being used multiple times. So once you find it, my perfect example is Cornelius. I was researching a project and there was a Cornelius ancestor, and I thought, oh, finally, a nice original name. Well, as I got back into the generations farther, every son had a son named Cornelius, because Cornelius was a great-great-great-grandfather. So it was the standing joke that it was a family of Cornelii, because there were so many named Cornelius. And it was incredibly confusing. So that where you think it's going to help, sometimes it hinders greatly.
For sure.
I really like the Scandinavians, and your example there, Olaf Thorson. It is, you know, that the father is Thor. You may not know exactly which Thor, but at least you're starting with a name.
Right.
The Welsh the same. You know, it might be somebody up somebody, and so you'll at least know what his father's first name was.
But it all depends on how many Thors were in town that year.
That's true.
There could have been a lot of Thors.
Could have been a lot of Thors, and there were.
Another thing I mentioned here, nicknames is very common. And I know that, you know, the woman's name might be Elizabeth, but she also might be known as Beth or Lizzie or Betty. And as you look through the documents, she might be called multiple different nicknames. And it gets very confusing, especially the documents that are more casual, whether they're church documents or something else. And then for Jack, you could have John or Jonathan or other forms. So how do you work your way through what could be a confusing set of nicknames as well?
Well, we also factor in a little bit of Latin, because you get into some of the church records and everyone's name had to be Latinized for the church records. So you're no longer Jacob, you're Jacobus. And so you have to open your mind and your thought process as to not only what would that name be translated to or changed to a little bit. You want to confirm that Jacobus is the Jacob that you're looking for. Elizabetha is the Lizzie that you're looking for, and their son Cornelius is the right Cornelius. So you look for all of the names, all of the ages, and specifically the location too, because if that record is from, you know, Mayslick, Kentucky, did they live in Mayslick, Kentucky, or were they actually over in Tennessee? So you look at all of the factors to confirm that those names are who you're really looking for. And sometimes it takes a couple wrong ones that you've added in to make sure that you find the right one as well.
But have both of you seen a lot of examples of this in documentation you look at, whether it's online or real documentation, where they're talking about nicknames and it gets confusing to connect them back to what their real name is?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even in some of the court documents, when it comes to someone listing out all of their children and even their wives, you know, sometimes it would say their wife Elizabeth, and then it would be later on, it would be Lizzie also gets, you know, the bed and the dresser. So it's, you know, and sometimes in the time that it was written, things were casual. And where they wanted to start off formal with Elizabeth, it ended up being very casual and going by Lizzie. So it can sometimes even evolve in the same document.
Do you see this too, Dad?
Yes, I saw it just the other day with Virginia, who was Jenny. And it was Jenny, Jenny, Jenny all the way through. And then all of a sudden it was Virginia again.
Interesting.
And it's really a trouble when they use initials, because you'd be looking for a V, but they would be a J on the census record for Jenny. And I think, well, did he get married again? Did he marry somebody else? Well, no, it's Jenny, but she's truly Virginia.
Interesting.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that could be very confusing. Well, at least we know, Sally, if you had another son or grandson, you would name him Cornelius. At least we know that. And Dad would name his Thor. There you go. All right, well, let's talk about our 10 steps for getting started on your family history. So this is really to give you kind of really actionable steps you can get started, get going on your family history, whether you're doing it alone, whether you're doing it with your family or maybe a sister or brother. We're going to kind of take you through this. It really starts with determining a target ancestor.
A lot of people want to start off with whoever crossed the pond. They want to know how their family got here. And it's 2024. And without knowing how many years your ancestors have been stateside, that's a hard ask. So you want to have some goals that are achievable, because each time that you achieve a goal, you may have to pivot to the next goal. Don't assume that your goals are going to be a straight line. You may have to, go a little bit south before you can go north to get to that port where they crossed to the pond.
Interesting. And also you mentioned just don't make a goal that's so huge that it becomes discouraging, right? And that you end up abandoning your love of genealogy because you made your goal so huge that it's unattainable, or at least not attainable right away.
Right. Know that there's going to be hurdles no matter what you begin to look for. But as long as you can achieve those hurdles and enjoy the journey, then you're going to make those small goals amass to a large goal.
Absolutely. So our step one is review what records and information about the ancestor you have already. And Dad gave an example here about several of the books he was given by some of our ancestors, which gave a lot of really great information, both on the Pope line and the Norford line. So he immediately had a head start. But really review, whether you've got old letters, whether you have diaries, whether you have old family Bibles. And Sally, I'm sure you have other ideas of what you should review in terms of records.
Well, and look outside the norm, because you may find that there are property records that they've kept behind old pictures. It's interesting to know what our ancestors held onto, whether it may be their railroad work log that documented the route that they took on the railroad. It could be their school records that, for whatever reason, they kept their report cards or something. There's going to be some kind of clue in almost every document that you have of your ancestors.
So are you recommending that people take their pictures off the wall and look at what's in the back and unframe them?
Well, if you think they might be hiding something back there that's, a couple $100, or their marriage license, it wouldn't be a bad idea to consider where some of your ancestors may have put something valuable, because depending on their lifetime, if it was prohibition or if it was something that they were keeping secret from everyone, it could be hidden in some of those records that you have.
And then the other thing you can do is go to family reunions and talk to family members to get the oral history from people.
Absolutely.
And you can have happen to what happened to Dad and me last year. We went to the Norford family reunion and we got handed a huge box of materials from a cousin, essentially because they knew Dad was pursuing this and that he was going to be looking at all this material. So you never know where you can find it.
Exactly.
It was a massive amount. It was my grandfather's accumulation of letters to England and from England and documents he found in courthouses that he used to write this book, The Norfolk Family History. And this cousin who was holding it gave it to me because I'm his grandson and working on it. And you might hit a gold mine like that at a reunion.
Absolutely.
Right. No question. Number 2 is start research notes from the beginning and start a folder. And
Yeah.
I assume you agree with this, Sally, that you should always just stay organized from the very beginning. Don't get disorganized up front or it'll get discouraging.
Well, and you want to use your time wisely. So like those 2 forms that we showed as examples, you want to remember to the best of your ability. And if you can't remember, you want to jot down that you already have those death certificates or those marriage records. So when you are looking for more documentation, you know not to bother wasting your time looking for those records. So get a good grasp of what you have and what you need. And that way your wins will be more common than your duplications.
Mm-hmm. For sure. What form do you keep your notes in, Sally and Dad? Just curious, both of you. Do you do all electronic? Do you do a lot written? Do you have both?
Bill?
Yeah, I've got more paper than I should have. And my wife certainly would agree with that because I started out that way. And I've gone increasingly electronic as I figured out how to do it. But I just sort of figured it out myself. And I didn't have any of those search engines or any of that. I'll tell a quick story on myself. This cousin reached out to me, distant cousin, recently because he'd seen that we were distantly related and he wanted to talk about my tree. And he asked me, which search engines are you using? I didn't even know what he was talking about. I didn't know that any of those things, your top 10 list there, I didn't know any of them existed. And so, I'm, that's sort of happening into that kind of stuff. And I've now begun to understand how to keep more electronically and less paper.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I know you like to take a lot of written notes, so that's one reason I asked.
You're going to get all this, whatever paper I don't get rid of, you're getting it all.
And I keep an electronic note. So I use Google Docs so I can have access to them at any time. And I just keep a copious note system going. Sometimes they start out on scratch paper, but they get on to an electronic document.
Mm-hmm. I've done the same myself at work. I know that I was always a voracious note taker. I always did lots of to-do lists. And I noticed about 7 or 8 years ago, I started keeping my to-do list in Outlook, actually electronically. And I've made the transition to be about 90% electronic now. So I'd recommend you try to go as early as possible to electronic. It's just easier and you can print it out at any time.
Absolutely.
All right, so number 3 is start review with hints on Ancestry.com or other platforms. So you guys want to talk a little bit about hints, the good, the bad, the ugly?
I can start by saying that is the exact word that Sally used early on with me after I met her and she started helping me, was don't accept the hints that Ancestry was giving you. They are only a hint and they can be a guide to maybe starting to try to find something, but be super careful about hints.
Yes. Hints are suggestions. They are clues to help with your research. They're wonderful when they work, and they can be absolutely decimating if you accept the wrong hint and you are sucked down into a rabbit hole that takes you hours and days to get back out of. So they're hints, they're suggestions. And look at those records that you're adding to support your ancestors and make sure that they are of value to supporting your ancestors. If it's fluff or if it's a maybe, if it's a maybe, you can keep it, but don't put any credence on it. You know, note that that might be my person or it might not.
Mm-hmm. Yep, good point. Dad, how many man hours do you think you lost in pulling names back out?
I don't know. Sally said, days and weeks, days
Right.
and days and weeks.
Mm-hmm, for
Very
But
sure.
at least you
Very
enjoyed the
discouraging.
journey.
Yes,
That's
you did.
important that you enjoy the journey.
Enjoy the journey down the rabbit hole and then back
Mhm.
out.
And I learned a lot because I learned about very interesting parts of history, even when somebody a number of generations out turned out not to be the right ancestor, and I had to take him back out. But it was a lot of work. And what I told Sally is that even though some very cool people have ended up being taken back out of the tree because I went down the wrong line, I'd rather have it shorter and right than longer and sort of fictitious.
Yes. Agreed. So next step is to evaluate what's missing. You've now done your initial review. You've done your start of your research notes. You looked at the hints. You started the little chart that Sally recommended where you started your little tree. And now you really want to figure out what is missing. What are pieces of data related to important people in your tree that are missing and how are you going to find it? Any thoughts here about kind of the realization of what is missing and how to go after it?
Well, you look at the time frame and you consider that list, that slide that you had of all the different source documents that you can find, and think about where your ancestor is going to be listed in any of those and how you can access that. Whether it be going to the library and looking for city directories, looking for a will, there's a whole host of options for us to look for a record. And it's knowing what we're looking for that is the first point. You don't want to just, hit a search engine and put in somebody's name and see what comes up. It's not a lottery. You want to have a mission that you can achieve.
Right. And if you love puzzles, you'll love genealogy because in a sense,
Absolutely.
genealogy is just one humongous puzzle that never ends, right?
Right.
And so evaluating what's missing, don't get discouraged. Just understand, okay, that's the puzzle and that's the piece of it that you're missing. You need to go find it. So, any thoughts, Dad, about figuring out what's missing and how to go find it?
Well, my resources are extremely limited compared with Sally's and my knowledge. And so what I do is I use all the resources that I know about, like Family Search, for example, and look at their records and all of that. And then if I really get desperate, I call Sally.
Very smart man.
She's the one.
So next one is to search for name, place, and time period. Essentially, those being kind of the triumvirate of what you're looking for initially.
Right.
Any thoughts there?
No, not really. Let Sally take this one.
Okay. When you think about searching for the name, you want to broaden that out. So just like Silence Washburn's son Daniel, we were looking for Washburn's. We weren't looking for Daniel. We were looking for his brother. But I knew his brother had siblings. So when I opened up the search for Washburn, Daniel popped up. And that article is fantastic. It lists not only what happened with Daniel, but with his parents, with his grandparents. And so that correlates with the name Washburn, the place, and the time period. And it documents all three of those.
And you might never have found Silence. You might never have found that whole connection, right? Unless you looked at the brother.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So broaden the name to people rather than just looking at the line itself, broaden it out and look at
Right.
the brothers, the sisters, the aunts.
Well, and another,
Something real simple, Tom, something real simple that I admit that I didn't do properly when I first started, but I did figure it out pretty fast, was look at, once you get somebody and it looks like it might be the right person the next generation out, if you have dates, look at the dates. Because I found one person that was in all of the search possibilities I knew about, family search and all of them. And the only problem is he was 3 years old when his daughter was born. And I was pretty sure that wasn't right. And it was repeated all over the place.
right.
And so either the dates were wrong or that was probably a sibling. And I just wasn't alert enough right at the very beginning to look carefully at the dates. If I had a name, I was overjoyed and I plugged it in.
Or do you start thinking to yourself, maybe I've gone down a rabbit hole and picked the wrong ancestor, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Something's wrong like that. Yeah.
Well, and I think, Bill, you said it, you get overjoyed and you're so excited to add another generation back that the excitement trumps the looking to see if it's an actual legitimate ancestor or not. The
Yes.
excitement wins. And because genealogy can be very addictive. So it's another win and you're another genealogy brick wall possibly hurdled over and another generation back. So
It
you
clouds your
wanna add that
judgment.
person.
Clouds your judgment for sure.
Absolutely.
So number 6, we have create a research plan. And this could be something as simple as using Sally's templates that we reviewed earlier. That could be your research plan, or you could do it in some other format. If you're more like a project planner, you could do a project plan around how you want to do this research. But any thoughts here about creating a plan before you execute it?
Well, I think the plan is knowing the options. First of all, you want to know what's missing. You want to, that's your number 4. You want to search with the name, place, and time period. And then your plan is to surmount the challenges that you're going to have when you've got number 4 and number 5 already conquered. So those ways to have a plan is like, well, you've done all of the online searches that you know about. Are there any others? Do I need to look at maybe Google Docs to see if there's any online books that would help you? Do you need to make a plan to take a little trip to a research facility or a library that would have some documents? Those plans, you want to maximize your time.
Or you mentioned going to like the state of Virginia's site. They have a lot of good records, so broadening out your search. Yeah, for sure. What about you, Dad? Do you have any kind of planning techniques you do when you're really going after a big ancestor?
I've tried to do it in a more organized way. What I did was I started and went far out and then started trying to figure out a plan. As Sally knows, I did it backward, and it was mostly out of enthusiasm and absolute lack of knowledge. I've learned what I do know, which is a fraction of what Sally knows. What I do know has been through trial and error. And so, yeah, as Sally said, I have a lot better idea now how to research things, but I started without a plan.
And because of your trial and error, though, now you are more organized when you attack it.
Definitely more organized now, but I started before I had any plan. And only subsequently I've sort of gone back and developed more of a plan. So your idea is right. Do the plan first.
So number 7 is transcribe documents. And I know Sally has done a lot of great work for us doing this activity. Transcribing can be handwritten. It can be typed up in a Word document. It can be taking images and putting them into a PDF format or some other format to keep them for posterity, or maybe even post them to ancestry.com.
Mhm.
Any thoughts, Sally, about kind of what some best practices around transcribing?
Well, even if you don't transcribe the documents that you find, read them. Read them and comprehend what they say. You want to make sure that you have the first page, all the middle pages, and the last page, because you want to take that every fact in that document to heart to apply to your ancestors, and then know that you've got the whole picture of what that document was going to tell you about. You want to consider all of the names that it lists. You want to consider the property that it listed, and every clue that there might be to their children, whether it be the witnesses for the documents. When you transcribe a document, you learn so much more than just copying it and putting it in your file. You want to read it, you want to comprehend it, you want to capture every bit of information that you can.
But even like that one will and testament we were showing earlier, you can take an image of that and put it into ancestry.com. But if you don't also transcribe it, a lot of people won't be able to read it, right?
Correct.
So it's almost necessary for some documents to go ahead and
Yes.
transcribe.
Well, and even though you don't have to transcribe, say, a death certificate, death certificates have a wealth of information on there because the informant may be a game changer. The name of that informant may break down a barrier for you. They usually have the cemetery where the individual is buried. That might be something that you didn't have. Maybe that cemetery isn't documented. So there's a wealth of information on all of these documents that you're going to find, and everything is a possibility to be a valuable clue.
No question about it. And Dad, do you do any transcriptions, or do you?
No, no.
Okay.
I don't. That's really beyond my beginner level.
Got it. And so you just read the document pretty much the way it comes.
I read, if someone has typed it out, I read it. But those documents Sally can read, I couldn't read.
So number 8, we've got speak to family and friends and neighbors. This goes to the oral tradition we talked about earlier. This, of course, is an important part of your research, just to get kind of old stories and maybe things that they remember, especially if they're still around. We talked to Sally about maybe even trying to record these sessions if they're kind of lengthy sessions with your grandfather and you're not sure how long your grandparent will be around.
Absolutely.
Recording them just so that you have it for posterity for later when they're talking about their parents or their grandparents. Any thoughts here?
Don't think about looking at the friends and neighbors as a weak look at what's going on in their lives. The friends and neighbors can be such an integral part of someone's life. And even if you're looking at the census documents and say 1920, you've got your ancestors, you can't find them in 1930. Go back to the 1920 and see who they're living next to, or see who their witness to their marriage was living, where they were living. And you might be able to find your people, and with it just being a transcription error, or maybe the surname section of the census form is so smudged it couldn't be transcribed correctly. So all of those people are going to be clues, regardless of when and where they were. So if you've got a challenge ahead of you, kind of fan out. That's one of the genealogy terms. Look at the fan group.
Yep, good point. So number 9 is set up a new tree if necessary and search related member trees. And of course, Dad, this is what you did when you set up Pope and Norford initially, and then started searching some related member trees.
Exactly.
Any thoughts about this? And I guess, Sally, since you've done so many of these, how long does it take you to set up a new tree for a customer?
It depends on the in-depth analysis that you want on that tree. I do these I can do a fairly quick tree if I'm working on DNA and I'm trying to triangulate out some matches for somebody. The beautiful thing about Ancestry is you can have as many trees as you want and you can make them private. And so you can have a working tree that is for your purposes. And until you know those people that you're working on actually go in your good tree, you can have them in a testing work tree. So it's a nice tool that you can put people in and records in, and if it doesn't pan out, then you don't have to worry about taking them out of your good tree. It's a working environment.
Okay. Yep, that's good. Final one is DNA samples. And we've talked a little bit about this and Dad taking the 3 different DNA tests and that DNA samples are a big part of what we would do. Is your thought though, Sally, this should be at the end of this process like we have here, or would you recommend people take it a little bit earlier in the process?
I would recommend that it's done at your comfort level. Some people start off with taking their DNA tests and then want to build the tree, or they take a DNA test and find a surprise and realize that they've got some research that they need to do. So DNA needs to be at your comfort level because it's your test, your results, your decision. But I can tell you that the DNA is never wrong. So if you've got some people that don't match up as you believe they should, then you might have a non-maternal event with adoptions and that kind of thing that you hear about in the news. So it's something where if you think that there might be an issue, you might want to avoid. You have to have an open mind when you take your DNA test to be ready for any result that might arrive.
And you might have some surprises. I mean, you heard Dad talking about all the Scots in our family, right? And then we've heard your stories, Sally, about you reconnecting people who were adopted with the families they never knew.
Yes.
So there are all kinds of surprises that could happen. But I would think if you value your time and you want to make this process as efficient as possible in building out your family tree, that you'd want to take your DNA samples as early as you can in the cycle. That's just me.
The DNA can act as a confirmation tool to make sure that the research that you're doing is tying to the same research and the same ancestors that your DNA is matching to.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. I'd do it early. If you're, I mean, as Sally says, if you're comfortable with the whole idea, I'd do it early.
And you heard what Sally said earlier. She with some of her customers, she was actually setting their trees up after they took the DNA samples. So
yes,
it could really help with the structure of it.
Yeah, but I've had people contact me, and I've contacted people because of 23andMe, for example. That's the first one I did. Would send every now and then, like once a month or something, would say you have new DNA relatives. And I would skim through those, and some weren't very interesting, but some were intriguing, and I would send out a message. And you hear from maybe back from 1 out of 10 people you send a message to, but sometimes they'll say, yes, indeed, I've got information that you really need. And that is exactly how we found this cousin in North Carolina who has organized this Pope DNA group. Was because I reached out to somebody on 23andMe who was a close match. And he came back and said, yes, I have a tree and I'd be happy to compare it with you, but the person you really should be in touch with is so-and-so in North Carolina, because he has this DNA. And I contacted him and he said, take that Y chromosome.
That's how you got there.
DNA. And you tell me, so it was indirect, but it was because I reached out to somebody who 23andMe said was a fairly close match. And he directed me to this other person. And so if I had never taken 23andMe, we'd have never gotten that information that allowed us to break the brick wall that my father and grandfather couldn't break.
So DNA really is a miracle in a lot of ways.
For us, for me, it is. For me, it is.
Yeah. Well, that was the 10 steps for getting started on your family history. All right. Well, Sally, thank you so much for joining tonight. Want to just get your last thoughts if people are thinking about either contacting you and getting your services, or even just thoughts about how people should get started in researching their family history.
Well, one thing that I want to end with a little bit is that there's a saying that we die 3 times. So we die once when our body ceases, once when we're buried, and the final time is when someone says our name for the last time. And when we do our genealogy, we are honoring and remembering all of our ancestors. So if you think about it, doing it that way, with that thought process in shining a light on our ancestors, regardless of what they did, whether they be villains, bootleggers, or royalty, you would not exist if it wasn't for them. So I think genealogy is the ultimate way to honor and respect our ancestors. So another point about messaging with Ancestry, 23andMe, and all of the companies is for the audience to please go look at their inbox on their accounts if they have them, and please respond to the messages, because that is one of the saddest aspects, I think, for myself and for clients, is that folks don't respond to their messages. And it could be something that they didn't even realize that they had an inbox with messaging capabilities on these sites. So if they could go check those messages, that would be awesome. And yes, if they're interested in help, whether they've got a brick wall or they found that they may have some ancestry that is new to them, they can reach out and contact me on Facebook or my website, Genealogy by Sally Cray, and I'd be happy to help. It's
That's
a
awesome.
passion and an obsession a little bit.
How do they cure their addiction that they're going to get into?
It is addicting, that is for sure. But it is so rewarding to know that you're finding ancestors, you're finding little bits of yourself, and you're honoring them and making sure that they are still relevant.
That's great. Dad, any final thoughts for people who are just getting started on their family search?
Well, first of all, I could never begin to say it as eloquently as Sally did, but I definitely agree with the word addiction, because luckily I don't have any others, but this is so addicting. You want to know. I started by wanting to know, to go a little bit beyond where Dad and Granddaddy went, and my grandfather Norford. They got out to a certain point, and I put all that in. But then I thought, with all the new technology and the internet and all that, I surely can go a little farther. And I've gone farther and farther. Oh, I just got to find that one's ancestors. And it's, but also if like you and me, a person is also a history buff, it is just hardly anything you can do better than this, because you will find, whether they're bootleggers or royalty, as Sally said, you will find that they were involved in something, whether it was battles or pioneering or whatever. And you will then sidetrack off and either refresh your memory if you knew a lot of history, or learn a lot of new history, which is what mostly for me. I've learned so many new things in the past 4 years that I've been doing this.
Speaking of the kind of stories that get you off on these tangents where you just can't stop, one of them was the Richard the Lion-Hearted and picking up the head off the battlefield of the chopped off head. But what was the one story you found one of our ancestors who was keeping I think it was the twin sisters up in the tower or something?
No, that was Richard III and the princes and the two princes in the tower.
The princess.
The two princes in the tower. And no, that was because one of the ancestors who was one of the not good ancestors was the one allegedly, according to the stories, that Richard gave the assignment to go tell the keeper of the Tower of London to make the two young princes disappear. And he was a very bad guy, if that story is accurate.
Right.
The other part is the Welsh minor lord, the soldier, who was the one, according to the history and the stories, the one who on the battlefield in 1485 that ended the Plantagenet dynasty, that was the one who actually, when Richard III, who was the last king of England to actually be killed leading his troops. And when he was unhorsed, and this Welsh ancestor is reported to be the one who actually delivered the blow that crushed his head, and he picked up the crown and took it to his prince, who was Henry Tudor, who then declared himself king and became the first Tudor king, Henry VII.
But you can see, Sally, why these stories get into Dad's head and then he can't stop, because then this stuff is so fascinating that the fact that even if we were related to them or not related to them, they're still incredible stories.
Well, and I like to think that it's our ancestors went through everything that they went through, whether it be a battlefield or, working through the weeds and surviving the Civil War, or, just the fact that they were on covered wagons going out west. If I think about everything that they went through, my day's not nearly as bad.
Oh, no.
It's true.
It's amazing how some of them survived at all, that were here.
Well, Dad, I want to thank you very much for appearing tonight, and also for all the work you've done for the family, being the family historian. I can't thank you enough. One day I'll try to carry on the process that you're doing in my retirement. I can't.
A lot of it's coming to you, believe me.
Can't do it until then. I don't have the time for it, but I will one day.
I understand.
And Sally,
thank you, Tom, for setting this up. This has been a lot of fun, and of course, anytime we can get Sally on camera, we learn a lot.
And Sally, what an absolute honor for you to join us tonight. And I will put all of your information, your website, down below in the comments. And we enjoyed it so much, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you ever so much for the opportunity tonight. It's been a lot of fun.
And everybody, good luck on your starting of your family history. Hope you have a lot of success. And again, reach out to Sally and drop us a comment. Tell us what you thought of the episode tonight. Please like the video and please subscribe to the channel. Everybody have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.